So I'm a huge fan of superhero multiverses. It's one of my favorite concepts in comics. And watching the DCEU and MCU completely misunderstand what makes the idea so awesome and just completely and utterly butcher general audiences' interest in it has been a real tragedy. Most people are sick to death of multiverses before they've even really begun to be explored, due to the poor reception of movies featuring it, like The Flash and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. And for movies like Deadpool and Wolverine or No Way Home that actually were both successful and well-liked, that wasn't so much because of the idea of a multiverse itself, as much as it was just people's excitement at seeing pre-established versions of characters they love being able to return and interact with modern versions. And even that is something people are immediately souring on, with how it's used in movies like The Flash and The Marvels. And though the DCEU and its idiotic plans to work towards some kind of half-assed version of Crisis on Infinite Earths are dead and buried, the MCU is still marching forwards towards its big multiversal event of Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars. And though these movies are looking to become some of the most expensive movies ever made, most audiences still don't really know what the hell a multiverse is or why the hell they should be invested in it, besides a few potential cameos here and there. But as the MCU's so-called Multiverse Saga has been failing to endear regular audiences to the concept, there was another Marvel film out of Sony of all places that was able to use the multiverse in a way that made audiences both understanding of and interested in the concept and the types of stories it can tell. I'm of course talking about Morbius. When Vulture appears at the end of the movie, letting us know the universes are heading for collision and the world will never be the Oh wait, these are the wrong notes. Ooh, that's embarrassing. Let me see. Oh yeah, I meant Spider-Verse. The success of both Into and Across the Spider-Verse have led to us living in a world where previously unknown to all but comic fan characters like Spider-Man Noir, Spider-Pig, and Spider-Man 2099 are household names with whole lines of toys and merch both kids and adults have been eating up. While at the MCU, I can't tell you how many goddamn He Who Remains toys I watched collecting dust on toy shelves for months. And ask the majority of casual MCU fans who Sylvie or America Chavez are, and they're gonna look at you like you are speaking tongues. So why has Spider-Verse been such a success that fans are willing to patiently wait like half a decade for the next part after ending on a damn cliffhanger, while the MCU's Multiverse Saga has had to resort to cheap gimmicks like Robert Downey Jr. returning as Dr. Doom just to remind people that they're even making a new Avengers movie? Well, there are a million reasons, but as it pertains to the multiverse, I've narrowed it down to three major ones why Spider-Verse's version of the multiverse has been a success that seems to interest people to the concept, while the MCU has been floundering at selling the idea to audiences and making people say they hate the very idea of it when they don't even know what it's supposed to be. The first of which is the most important. The Spider-Verse multiverse is easy to understand. The way Spider-Verse introduces the concept of alternate universes to us is completely character-based. We start seeing the life of one Spider-Man, then he tragically dies. And when another, very different one shows up, we see the same style of montage that introduced us to the first one, but with some major changes, letting the audiences quickly and easily understand what an alternate universe is. Then, as they introduce more, even more deviated versions of Spider-Man, they use the same montage style to show how similar and different they each are from each other. We have a universe where Spider-Man is a beloved hero, one where things haven't gone so well for him, one where he's in a retro noir setting, one where he's a girl, one where he's a pig, one where he's a younger girl who shares a psychic connection to a mech suit. With this gimmick, no matter how bizarre and convoluted the differences, it's easy to understand that they're just the basic idea of Spider-Man from a different universe. It's one of those things people overcomplicate in their heads, but it's actually very simple, like time travel. And speaking of, how did the MCU introduce the concept of the multiverse? For some friggin' reason, they decided to mix it with that other sci-fi concept a lot of regular people seem to have a lot of trouble with. When the Avengers go back in time, Hulk learns from the Ancient One that if they change things in the past, it creates a branching timeline where those changes continue into the future. They accidentally create one of those branches in New York of 2012 when they allow Loki to escape custody with the Tesseract. We next see Loki in his spin-off show, where he is immediately arrested by the newly introduced Time Variance Authority. We learn that their job is to destroy branching timelines and any individual variants who escape those timelines in order to preserve a sacred timeline. At the end of the show, we learn that the TVA is controlled by the mysterious He Who Remains in order to separate his main timeline off from the rest of the multiverse and to prune variant timelines from branching out and creating new universes in order to stop multiversal wars from occurring when alternate universe versions of himself discover each other's alternate universe and launch those wars. So, you may have heard all of this and thought, it's super easy to follow. But if you're watching a video like this, you're likely already pretty knowledgeable of basic comic lore, time travel, and alternate timelines and multiverse concepts in general. But to your regular non-nerd viewers out there, introducing this much crazy nonsense before you've even finished explaining time travel is like tossing a kid into the deep end of the pool as soon as he's born. Throughout the Infinity Saga, the MCU did a pretty good job of easing regular people who don't read comics into the more bizarre aspects of continuity. They turned Jane Foster into an astrophysicist to give sci-fi mumbo-jumbo justifications for Thor and Asgard, instead of just telling audiences it was magic god crap and they should accept it. They introduced the Chitauri as monstrous alien invaders, closer to what moviegoers are used to seeing from alien invasions, before introducing more ridiculous alien comic designs like Thanos and Gamora. And I think this is what they were attempting to do by linking the multiverse to something like time travel, but I think in doing so, they accidentally made it much more complicated than it needed to be. Most people can barely follow the idea of a different timeline. Now you're asking them to both understand the difference between a timeline and a universe and wrap their hand around an interchronal multiversal war. Now, to be fair, most people out there did not bother to follow the MCU shows, so their forced introduction to the multiverse in the MCU is actually going to be No Way Home, Multiverse of Madness, and Quantumania. As I said, No Way Home keeps things simple, but with the other two, in Multiverse of Madness, they decide to go with when you dream you're seeing your life in an alternate universe, introducing a character who's unique across all universes and can travel between universes in a big star, and start giving exposition on upcoming universe-destroying incursions before they've even eased people into what this whole multiverse thing is. Then they start tossing actors people are familiar with from previous movies who start interacting with other actors from other previous movies, but they're not playing the actual character they're familiar with, they're playing alternate versions of those characters who are similar in some ways but different in others, and actually more similar to other versions that they didn't play, but then they start killing them all off as soon as they're introduced, and yeah, again, to me, this is all simple as hell. I read convoluted stories like this all the time, but regular folks, the massive success of these movies that justify their insane budgets are not held up by advanced level and intellectually superior nerds like you or I. But it's by the rest of those regular bumbling dipshits who wander into theaters to watch pretty lights and cool characters for 2 hours. A lot of those dumbasses can barely comprehend the idea that the MCU and DCEU are two separate continuities in the first place. Asking them to follow and keep track of multiple continuities within just the MCU itself is gonna be a lot if you ain't walking them through it. You may think I'm exaggerating, but I've heard multiple stories of people in theaters being so damn sure that the guy who appeared at the end of Avengers was Hellboy that they said it out loud to everyone. Most people are just not equipped to handle this kind of stuff. Which would be fine if the multiverse was just going to be a thing for a movie or two, but the MCU decided to center an entire saga around it. This was able to work for setting up the Infinity Stones and Thanos because the idea was so easy to explain and understand that you barely needed to be paying attention to follow along. This guy wants these stones so he can have power to do a thing he wants to do. That's it. That's really what the Infinity Saga was. But with Kang as the big bad they were planning to set up, it's more convoluted. This guy is this universe's version of a guy from our future but his past who exists in infinite universes that all discovered interuniversal time travel and went to war. So he quarantined his universe and created an organization to stop new timelines from forming off of that universe, but then he's killed and the universe resets and reconnects to the multiverse, so it was now just connecting to it, but was also always connected to it. Then we meet this guy who looks like him but isn't, that was banished to a realm beyond time and space by all of these guys who look like him but with different outfits, and once they beat these guys, all these guys are going to do something. And that was our basic setup for the upcoming Avengers: The Kang Dynasty, which has been taken out back and put out of its misery. They likely would have fleshed things out a bit more in the movies leading up to it, but would that have made things simpler for people? I highly doubt it. A lot of people, for some reason, have trouble understanding time travel in the first place. That's why Endgame wisely hand-waved the logistics of it away. Tying a time-traveling villain like Kang to their introduction of the multiverse in the MCU was a bad move, man. Meanwhile, over at Spider-Verse, their two big antagonists so far have been Kingpin and Spider-Man 2099. Kingpin is a guy whose family died, so he wants to connect to an alternate universe where they're still alive to be with an alternate version of them, no matter the cost to everyone else. Spider-Man 2099 runs an organization that wants to make sure that events that are supposed to happen in every universe happen so these universes aren't destroyed, even though it means that our protagonist will lose his father. Both characters and motivations are incredibly easy to follow. And even if you're just not paying attention, you can see that this guy is doing a thing that's going to make people die, and that's bad. And this guy is doing a thing that our main guy doesn't like, so they fight. Both are introducing big concepts in a very simple to understand way that makes the multiverse element more than just a simple gimmick, but an integral part of the plot that opens up a lot of very interesting ideas and questions. You can get really convoluted and weird in comics because most people reading them have read decades of continuity, or they're the kinds of people who like jumping into the middle of a story with decades of continuity behind it. Movie fans are not used to that kind of insanity. And the superhero movies that have been very, very successful have all kept general audiences in mind. And now, the second main reason people have responded more positively to Spider-Verse's multiverse than the MCU's, the multiversal world building is just a lot better. So Spider-Verse has had 2 movies. The MCU's Multiverse Saga has had 13 movies and 13 TV shows. And even just looking at the 6 projects that have had much to do with the multiverse, that's still a lot more time on the MCU's side to spend building the idea out. And across the world building of both these franchises, what have we seen out of the multiverse in that time? Well, in Spider-Verse, some of the main universes we've seen are a universe where Spider-Man was a great hero but died, passing the mantle to a young Miles Morales. A pastel-colored universe where Gwen Stacy was bit by the radioactive spider and vowed to fight crime after the death of her friend, Peter Parker. A universe where Peter Parker has fallen on hard times and lost some hope, but still fights on as Spider-Man before reconnecting with the love of his life and having a daughter. A black and white, morally gray universe where Peter is a noir-styled superhero detective. A funny animal universe where Peter Porker is the spectacular Spider-Ham. A futuristic, advanced anime-style universe where Penny Parker honors her late father by piloting his SB/SDR mech to fight crime. We don't spend a lot of time in these universes, since most of the first movie is based on Miles' world, but what we do see feels quite fleshed out, and they give us as much as they can in a very short period of time. And most importantly, each of them feel like they actually exist out there in the multiverse somewhere, with these characters each being an incredibly important figure in the world and stories of those universes. But at the MCU, we had a whole season of Loki to explore and flesh out the idea of the multiverse to audiences. What did we get in that time? Well, a universe where Loki is a blonde girl who learned she was adopted at a younger age, leading to her being not all that different. And we see a bunch of different Lokis from universes that sound more interesting, but we don't really get to see any of them. Well, that's all right. Loki was more of a quantum time travel variant show anyways. Our next multiverse-centered movie was Spider-Man No Way Home, which was also a joint project with Sony, so that doesn't count that much. So we'll skip to Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, where we get a universe where America Chavez comes from, where things are assumedly different, but we don't get into the details. There's a lot of plants. A universe where Doctor Strange really missed being with Christine, so he used the Darkhold to dreamwalk to other universes and caused an incursion, mostly destroying his own, and he became super evil. A universe where Peggy Carter got the super soldier serum instead of Steve Rogers, Maria Rambeau got the powers of Captain Marvel somehow, the Fantastic Four, X-Men, and Inhumans all exist, Wanda Maximoff somehow had her children biologically and is a suburban mom, Ultron sentries police the world, they have technology that allows people to project their private memories onto big screens for everyone to see, and they sell pizza balls. So we've got a pretty interesting apocalyptic horror universe that only really exists, though, to introduce the consequences of incursions to us for their upcoming Secret Wars film. Then one that's really not fleshed out at all, except to say that some girl comes from it, and one that was stuffed with a completely random mishmash of ideas. And what about the montage of random universes Strange and Chavez fall through before landing on the one they spend most of the movie in? Surely they count for interesting and exciting multiversal world building, ripe for potential. No, not really. Besides a couple, the majority of them are just your lazy fill-in-the-blank world universes like Giant Bee Universe, Canyon Universe, Skeletons Universe, Dinosaur Universe, Paint Bucket Universe, Volcano Universe. Any of these would obviously be super interesting to actually learn about or explore one day, but we know they're never going to spend time going into how a world covered in skeletons actually works, as much as I would love that. This is all just for lazy, meaningless visual splendor. As important to world building and continuity as the random montage of weird images we got in the first Doctor Strange movie. To be fair, though, there were a couple that they may have been planning to elaborate on in the future. We see a version of the Living Tribunal for a moment, a world overrun by Hydra, which seems like an obvious choice to elaborate on, and maybe the Pyramid World could have tied into the Ramatut version of Kang we saw later on, but I kind of doubt it. That's all just me being generous. None of these matter at all, and could have been filled with any combination of lights and colors, and it really would have had the same effect. For superficial visual splendor universes, Spider-Verse had a lot of fun in the sequel. Two of our main sequences take place in the futuristic universe of Spider-Man 2099 and the America/India amalgamation world of Spider-Man India. Like the ones we glimpsed in Multiverse of Madness, these are just superficially different too. But the difference is we actually spend time there. We get to see the way the world works. We get to watch our characters interact with the environment and people for a pretty good long time. If in Multiverse of Madness, America and Strange had spent actual time in Giant B universe or Cartoon universe, I likely would not even be making this video because I would be one of that movie's biggest defenders for that alone. But just glossing through them quick so you can put a shot in the trailer and claim this is a multiverse movie in advertising is such a letdown to fans of the genre. And in the second Spider-Verse, the new universes we get glimpses of for the main characters in that movie are... We get a London punk rock inspired world where an anarchist revolutionary version of Hobie Brown became Spider-Man, an edgy 90s comic style universe where an angst-filled clone of Peter Parker dubbed himself the Scarlet Spider, an alternate universe where Miles' dad died instead of his uncle and he was inspired to become a criminal instead of a hero, and many others. So, since Loki and Multiverse of Madness, how has the MCU multiverse grown? Well, we're introduced to a variety of Kang variants at the end of Ant-Man Quantumania, but we don't really get to see their universes, and likely now never will. And since we don't spend any time with them, we don't really get to learn the ways they're different or similar to the main Kang, who actually we also barely got to know because they wanted to keep his past and connection to this council mysterious. This is basically the same as those universes in Doctor Strange. Just quick, random, meaningless multiversal differences that were likely never going to be seriously explored. Egypt-themed Kang, sci-fi outfit Kang, lizard Kang, excited blue Kang, wow! Spider-Verse 2 was filled with random superficial alternate universe Spider-Man cameos like that as well, but there's a major difference. The movie took the time to tell us who the hell Spider-Man is and why we should even care about him. Both the actual Spider-Man Peter Parker and our variant protagonist Miles Morales. So when we see the idea stretched and shaped into the most bizarre and goofy forms imaginable while still being recognizably Spider-Man, it's pretty fun to imagine what the world those versions come from is like, and who knows, maybe we'll get to see him someday. Cat Spider-Man? Dinosaur Spider-Man? Cowboy Spider-Man? Since we know and give a crap about Spidey, it can make us imagine what the worlds they come from might be like, and because so many of the other Spidey's worlds have been shown to us, we can think that they actually do exist and come from worlds with their own individual stories and lives, even if they're a cat. But with a character like Kang, what reason was there in this scene to care about how Kang from an Egyptian world or lizard world was different from this main Kang? Who cares? What do we even know about this guy? Or even this guy we saw earlier? We've already met multiple Kangs and barely know him. And after seeing the random-ass worlds in Multiverse of Madness, we're left to assume that they probably just come from some other random patchwork universe that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Then we get to the universe at the end of the Marvels, where Beast exists, and he references Professor X, and Maria Rambeau is binary, and that's about all we know about this one. Is this the same one as seen in Multiverse of Madness? A different one? I don't know, and no one saw that movie, so likely doesn't matter. This isn't world building, it's just quick, meaningless cameos. However, to be fair, I do have to say, when we get to Deadpool and Wolverine, of all MCU projects, they do finally actually do a little world building with their multiverse, but it does so in a half-joking, half-serious way. Most of the universes introduced in here aren't much different than the fill-in-the-blank gimmick worlds of earlier. There are two differences, though. The first is that Deadpool does it half-jokingly, somewhat making fun of how the MCU has handled the multiverse so far. The other difference is Deadpool actually spends a bit of time in each universe and fights many of the Wolverine variants we see. I'm not going to sit here and criticize Eye Patch Wolverine and different actor Wolverine cameos in the same way I'm harsh on previous ones, because it's a Deadpool movie. Deadpool is not here for the same level of serious world building, and it's very sad to see that it takes the multiverse more seriously than a lot of previous MCU movies had. Anyways, what universes can we add to the MCU's multiverse? A post-apocalyptic X-Men universe, a universe where Wolverine is much older, a universe that endured a mutant genocide, a universe where both the X-Men and Hulk exist, a universe where Wolverine is short and one where he has an eye patch, and a universe where the X-Men were killed and Wolverine is racked with guilt. The last one is the only one that actually matters to the movie, and I'm going to be honest, I think it's a pretty interesting alternate universe Wolverine story. We see how things could have gone if he distanced himself emotionally from the X-Men, and we see him inspired to overcome his past and embraced his heroic identity again. But we do all know that if they weren't trying to come up with an excuse to have a classic and beloved actor return to the role, they wouldn't have come up with this story in the first place. And likely Deadpool 3 wouldn't have even been a multiverse movie at all. So, after all of these movies in alternate universes, what does the MCU have to get people excited and looking forward to a big multiversal crossover in Doomsday and Secret Wars besides just cameos? What character is there for people to be attached to and want to see again? Well, Sylvie? Maria Rambeau Photon? Alternate universe Mordo? Yeah, Wolverine, Deadpool, classic versions of Spider-Man. I'd love to see all of those characters again and have them interact with the MCU. But those worlds were all established well before the MCU was a thing. The worlds they've built since then, they don't really seem to be exciting anyone into seeing them cross over or wondering what other worlds they'll be building in those big event movies. And if no one actually cares about the multiverse, what are we doing here? And now the last reason may seem superficial and fanboy-y, but it's not. The universes in Spider-Verse are based on the comics. Besides a few exceptions, who happen to be some of the least interesting characters, Spider-Woman, most of the important alternate universe Spider-Man and Spider-Verse are either directly based on or heavily inspired by actual alternate universes from across decades of comics. You can tell that the creators bothered to look through those comics, or at least glance through Wikipedia pages on them, when coming up with which characters and universes to put in these movies. Spider-Gwen and SPDR had both appeared in comics only a few years prior to the movies, but in that time, the alternate universe version of Gwen Stacy specifically had proven incredibly popular. A young Miles Morales taking up the mantle of Spider-Man in the Ultimate Universe after that version of Peter Parker died was a storyline that had started way back in 2011. And though the movie does the details of the story quite a bit differently and much better, you can tell that they at least glanced at those comics. Spider-Man Noir first debuted years before that in a Marvel world inspired by the aesthetic and style of noir storytelling, with that version of Spider-Man standing out as a cult favorite design. And Spider-Ham comes from way back in the 80s as an homage to the funny animal-style superhero stories that have had their roots all the way back to the golden age of comics. These designs are weird and random because they're taken from completely unrelated stories based in unconnected universes by totally different creators in totally different time periods. It helps give it that actual multiverse feeling when these characters were created by completely different people. And that's the beauty of multi-generational superhero stories. You get all kinds of bizarre and interesting ideas from some of the most creative storytellers of all time, and also Brian Michael Bendis. And the sequel continues this philosophy of taking these universes and characters from the comics, with Spider-Punk, who debuted in 2015, Spider-Man India from 2004, and Spider-Man 2099 from 1992. There are a few characters they take massive liberties with, to the point that they're basically just making OCs, but these are some of the weakest and least popular characters from the franchise. But characters like Spider-Gwen and Spider-Ham already had a large number of fans from the comics, because they followed the basics of the important elements of their characters in the comics into the movie. They've proven also quite popular in movie form, which is, I mean, it's the entire point of adapting characters into movies in the first place. If you're just going to make stuff up, You're paying for the rights to use all of this pre-established and awesome shit. Now, the MCU used to take the comics at least halfway seriously when adapting characters and world building, and it led to some of the most popular characters in the entire Infinity Saga. But somewhere along the line, they completely stopped, and just thought they could grab up names from comics and just completely recreate them into their own ideas, leading to beloved movies like The Eternals and classic shows like Secret Invasion. And when they decided they were going to introduce something as big and complex as the multiverse, they could have used the comics as a template on how to do it, but they thought they knew better. Some of the major multiverse variances the MCU give us are Sylvie, an alternate universe version of Loki who is not named Loki, doesn't look or act like Loki, and by the end of the show doesn't even pretend to cosplay as Loki anymore. Her name is stolen from a legacy version of Enchantress in the comics, who is not from an alternate universe, and the idea of a female Loki is grabbed from the time when Loki was reborn as a female, also in the main universe. But this original character created for this show has pretty much nothing to do with either of those, and is not taken from any multiverse story involving Loki in the comics. And whether you like or dislike this character, her being a Loki was not actually important to the show. She could have been any survivor of a pruned world, and her revenge arc could have been pretty much the same. The only real difference being that the Loki we're following felt a connection to her because she was a Loki, but with proper writing, that could have been pretty much the same too. Most of the other Lokis are the same kind of situation. Sure, a kid Loki or a President Loki look pretty cool, but they're both taken from versions of the 616 main universe Loki in comics, not multiverse stories. So beneath the superficial imagery, there's not really anything for the creators to draw from, and so their roles are incredibly small and superficial. I mean, they could be fleshed out more, of course, but that doesn't really seem like something the writers want to do. I've got plenty more to say on Loki variants, but I feel I've already talked them to death in my previous multiverse video comparing the MCU and Invincible's use of the concepts. With Multiverse of Madness, the first real multiverse story most regular viewers saw out of the MCU, it's the same situation. Instead of using actual alternate universes from comics to build up the main universe Doctor Strange travels to, they just grab up superficial elements that have nothing to do with the multiverse and slap them together. The Doctor Strange variants are not based on actual alternate universe versions of Strange, and superficially, their different outfits are just inspired by different versions of his costume the main universe version of Strange has worn across the decades. The team name, the Illuminati, was also not anything involving the multiverse. It's a secret society in the main Marvel universe comprising some of the most powerful and influential heroes in the world, who meet in times of importance to secretly make decisions that will affect the entire world and beyond. There are plenty of awesome alternate universe super teams in Marvel Comics. The Squadron Supreme, who's Marvel's version of an alternate universe Justice League. The Exiles, who travel from universe to face different threats. Or even variant versions of the Avengers like the Ultimates. Any of these would have been pretty awesome to see explored and really set the idea of the multiverse to audiences who aren't familiar with it. But the movies don't actually care about fleshing out the multiverse, so they just grabbed up a random team name they thought sounded cool instead. And though a few members are part of the comic Illuminati, the way this group operates is nothing like it. These characters, these costumes, why are they using these multiversal variants in the MCU? It's not anything from the comics. It's just because they thought they looked cool, or they want a cameo by the actors. It's all superficial and for little more than marketing purposes to get people to go see the movie. In Spider-Verse, they had a different reason for choosing the characters they chose than the MCU had. It's because they were making a movie about the multiverse, and these were some well-known multiversal variants of Spider-Man. They used the comics as inspiration and wrote the movie around what characters they saw, and both saw were already pretty popular and thought would be pretty interesting to use for the plots they were coming up with. They could have just made up a bunch of random variants of their own, like the MCU does, but they didn't. They could have just made this a story about Peter Parker dying and Miles Morales taking over the mantle of Spider-Man without any multiversal theme to it whatsoever. But they wisely saw that Miles taking over as Ultimate Spider-Man in an alternate universe while a normal version of Peter continued as Spider-Man in the main 616 universe is part of what made Miles interesting to people, and based the whole movie around that idea. If they'd killed 616 Peter in the comics and just replaced him with this new character, he would have been one of the most hated characters of all time and bombed immediately. And the same would have gone for the movie. Making him a multiversal variant is what works because it's what worked in the comics. And now, with the MCU introducing a version of the Fantastic Four, why are they going to be based on an alternate universe instead of being the Fantastic Four of the main MCU world? One reason. This was supposed to be a multiverse saga, and they completely forgot to introduce any universes anyone would give a shit about for the MCU to cross over with. Setting a team people have been looking forward to seeing in the MCU for years on a different Earth is just a cheap way to make this a multiverse thing. There's no real reason this specifically even needs to be the Fantastic Four. If they'd already made a Fantastic Four movie from the start, but had not made a Hulk movie or Doctor Strange movie, this would likely just be about one of those guys based on some other universe instead. It's all interchangeable to them and doesn't matter. Had this been something like a Squadron Supreme movie or Exiles movie, that would have been an interesting way to set up an upcoming multiverse event movie, since that's what those teams exist in the comics to explore. In the early MCU, it was awesome to see characters like Iron Man and Captain America exist within the same universe and interact because that's how it always was in the comics, even though the movies had not been doing it that way to that point. With the Fantastic Four, though, we're not getting that. Miles exists on a different universe because that's how the comics introduced him, and it's led to his success as a character in the movies. The Fantastic Four exist on a different universe because why the hell not? And that kind of attitude in the world building bleeds over into audience reaction. Our first introduction to Reed Richards and Charles Xavier in the MCU was just their brutal deaths. How attached should we really get to this next versions we're going to be introduced to? When you see an alternate version of a character you already know get killed in an alternate universe, it gives you the feeling of that character being killed even though you know it's not that character. It's an interesting way to set the stakes. When you first see that character get killed in some other random universe, and now they're just going to introduce a new one in some other random universe, why should I care any more about one than I did about the other who's already dead? While the universe choices in Spider-Verse felt deliberate, the choices in the MCU just feel like what they are. Some random crap some random guy came up with. The multiverse in comics is used for 4 main reasons: to explore different paths characters could have followed with different choices or situations, to introduce very different versions of characters we're familiar with, to clean up and organize decades of convoluted, contradictory continuity, and to have separate continuities cross over. Spider-Verse explores all of those. The MCU kind of explores a couple of them, but not really. Their alternate universe versions of characters are usually only used for a scene or two, and then they're just tossed to the side, and they clearly don't give a crap about different past continuities. They just want the excuse for actor cameos. And that's the main difference between why one of them is using a multiverse people think is cool and are interested in seeing explored more, regardless of how goddamn long we have to wait or how damn overworked its animators are, while the other is so desperate, they just straight up paid Robert Downey Jr. like $100 million to come back and do another actor cameo. And for those of you who are wondering if I'm going to talk about it, trust me, you don't want to get me started on What If. And if you do, let me know, and I'll make videos screaming about how much I hate how that show uses it. Now anyways, this may surprise you after listening to me seemingly thwip-glaze Spider-Verse this whole video, but I'm actually not even a hardcore Spider-Verse fan. I like the movies, I think they're quite good, I look forward to the next one, but man do I have a lot of issues with them. From thinking they totally misunderstand what being Spider-Man even is, to the way they pretend to know more than they actually do about classic Spider-Man media and continuity. But as a superhero multiverse movie adaptation, it's really one of the only ones that understands the idea and what's made it appealing to comic fans and how to translate that to movie fans. But that's just in the movies. On TV adaptations, there's a whole other world of awesome multiversal stories. From the DC animated universe to the CW-verse, there's plenty more to talk about on the subject. And if you'd like to see a third darn video contrasting different multiverses to the multi-million-dollar ones of the MCU and DCEU, let me know below. Until then, don't let yourself live in the sad dystopian universe where you made the choice to not click that subscribe button. Hit it now to stop the butterfly effect that'll lead to all life on Earth being completely obliterated if you don't. It all comes down to this moment. Only you can save reality. And if you want all life to be destroyed, then I guess that's your choice too. Either way, until my next video, always remember, it's Morbin time.